Okay, so this is Stave 2 of A Christmas Carol, which I finally have my book this time. And we are going to look at 6 different things in this chapter that that just kind of stood out to us as worth mentioning. The first thing that we want to talk about is just how Dickens deals with time, how time is used in this whole well, throughout the book, but it really shows up, especially towards the beginning of this chapter, that we see. Well, why don't you say something about that?
Yeah, well, I was noticing or remembering that whenever I've seen this dramatized, or even when I read the book a long time ago, I always have this picture in my mind of these spirits coming to see Scrooge all on Christmas Eve. And at the end of the last stave, the spirit of Marley told Scrooge that he was going to be visited by a spirit on each night, and this was happening on Christmas Eve. So I was thinking, wow, how is this going to play out? Where is Scrooge going to see the third spirit on, what would it be, December 28th or December 27th,
Right.
something like that? But then we get the beginning of this stave, and there's all sorts of weird things going on with the time. The bell is going from 6 to 7, from 7 to 8, and then it stops. And then it was past 2 and the clock was wrong, and an icicle must have gotten into the works and all of that. So I don't know what do you think about what's going on with the time?
Yeah, no, he does, because towards the end, I mean, spoiler alert, but I think we all know the story pretty well. Yeah, but he, like you're right, he does have that time in the last chapter where he says, like, they did it all in one night. I guess they're spirits; they can do whatever they want,
Right.
But he's conscious of that. It's like he's like made a point of it. I mean, he could have just as easily started 3 days before Christmas, and had it be like that, but he didn't, and I wonder if that was, I mean, maybe it was just because, like, well, let's just put them all on Christmas Eve, because why not, but I
Which he could
wonder.
have done, but
Right.
why not have it like an hour for
Yeah,
each spirit, or 2
that's a
hours
good
for
point
each
too.
spirit, or something like that? Yeah.
Mhm. Right, yeah, he doesn't have to do them all. Like, obviously, he didn't intend to do them all in 3 separate nights. So why make a point of and he makes a point of the fact that when Marley shows up, it's what, 2 o'clock, and then the bells, he goes through the bell timing or chiming, and it's 12 o'clock. He like it's like he wants to mess with our sense of time. Like, I wonder if he wants us to kind of be a little disoriented, in a sense of, like, like Scrooge felt like disoriented. Like, well, what time is it? What, I don't even know. I don't even know when it is, let alone where it is. Just maybe to
Right.
give it that, just remove it even one step further from, like, just not from reality, but remove it from the normal course of things. I don't know. What do you
Right.
think?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the answer, but that all makes good sense. I think it is disorienting. It was a little bit distracting, but then maybe it prepares the reader to jump around and not to worry about it. Maybe that's the reason for it. I'm not sure.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, because he does. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Does he go in a sequential order in these, when the 3 spirits visit? Do they take him through, like, something that, is it chronological, or is it just kind of bounce around? I'm trying to think. I think in this one he does kind of go through, starts with his childhood, and then he goes to, his apprenticeship at Fezziwigs, and then he breaks up with Belle. She dumps him,
Right. Right. Yeah.
and then she's married. So I guess there is a sequential order there, but I don't know. I wonder if,
Yeah.
does he? I can't remember. I guess I'll have to. I'm gonna start noticing that. Does he want us to kind of, like, just not care so much about the timing of things, or what?
Yeah. Just suspend our disbelief. Um,
Yeah.
and just enter in, and not worry, almost like a fable, or a ghost story. He calls it a ghost story, and
Mhm.
maybe that's part of getting us into that
Yeah.
mode of thinking.
Yeah. The other thing one of the other things we were looking at is, just the appearance of the ghost. Each of these 3 ghosts obviously appears very differently, but I think the other 2, as we'll see, a little more understandable. The third ghost is, of course, the scariest. If nothing else, just because you don't see his face or hear his voice or anything.
Right. Right.
And then the second ghost, of course, is Jolly, and he's, but I mean, we can go into that. But this ghost is just, kind of weird looking. Like he doesn't he doesn't maybe that whole the fact that time is all thrown off is just to kind of get us ready for the ghost to be all kind of, he himself is like, we don't even know how old he is. He looks like a child, but he also looks like an old man. He's right there present, but he looks like he's far away. He's, at some point later on, his appearance starts to change to be like all the other characters that Scrooge has been seeing, but that's kind of all happening at once. I mean, he's just kind
He's
of
got like 20 arms and legs, I think, at one point.
yeah,
It's just
right,
very, yeah. And
right.
maybe, yeah. Well, what do you think about that? What?
I don't know. I mean, I wonder if maybe it's just to. I mean, it might just because because he's the ghost of Christmas past. It may be that he is like our own past is sometimes hard to nail down. Sometimes we remember things like they were yesterday, even though they're 20 years ago. And sometimes we remember something like it was 20 years ago and it happened yesterday. So our own sense of the past is always oftentimes a little disorienting, as it were, and sometimes we forget the past so much. Like it can seem young, but it can also seem old. It can seem too far away. Like we can't. Scrooge himself is kind of wrestling with like he's remembering things that and he could tell you the exact path towards the schoolhouse, and we'll talk about again like his something else that comes up that he remembers very vividly. He remembers all the details of Fezziwigs and Dick and all these people who were there, and yet he's forgotten them all. Like, so maybe the ghost of Christmas past is like, how can he have such a clear, vivid memory of all these things, and yet he's forgotten all of them, right? I don't know. I'm just musing here on this idea.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's those are all really good attempts at trying to figure out what this ghost's appearance means. Sometimes the past is all jumbled together, or things. I misremember when something happened, and or maybe two different things that happened separately, but I kind of blend them together in my mind, or it's kind of elusive sometimes, and this ghost, and the ghost also represents so many different memories because of his past, that maybe that's a way to show that this ghost is, contains a lot of different things that are fluid, and memory, maybe it's something about our mind, how our mind jumps from one thought to another. We can, one image or one memory can start us on a whole train of thoughts that go so quickly.
Yeah. And he also, the ghost of Christmas past has it's when his sister shows up. He's alone in the schoolhouse. His sister shows up, and the ghost says something like, she died a woman and had children, I think, and then Scrooge says, one child, my nephew, or a boy. And then he says, yes, your nephew. So it's like he knows. So why did he say children when he knew it was one child? And why did he say, I think, as if I'm not sure, and yet yes, one child, and it was your nephew. Like, so it's like the ghost of Christmas past himself is almost like mirroring like Scrooge's own kind of struggle to remember the past. I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like he's to me, it reminded me of a teacher who's kind of prodding the student. I think didn't she have one more, didn't she have children? Just trying to trigger that response from Scrooge, maybe. And I thought it was interesting
point, yeah.
too. There were two parts where Scrooge kind of makes a regretful comment about something that happened. One was he says, "Oh, I wish I would have given that little boy something. That's all." I'm trying to find. He sees. I think he sees himself lonely, and he's kind of tearing up. And then he says, "The spirit says, what's the matter?" He says, "Oh, nothing. Well, there was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should have liked to have given him something. That's all." And then later on, that happens again. It's almost word for word, but it's a different situation. But he ends with saying, "Oh, that's all." It's like he's trying to hide from the spirit but this is really affecting him, and he's feeling remorse over how he's behaved, and he's starting to change a little bit.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah, I think it was he was thinking about Bob Cratchit as he's like, oh, I was just thinking about Bob Cratchit in the store or whatever, and yeah, and then that's interesting that yeah, he's really taking just a few pages to really he develops Scrooge's character in such a strong way, which we'll talk about that a little more later. But he's I mean, he takes just a how big is this book here? It's 90 pages, and yet Scrooge is one of the most memorable characters in all of literature. And from that's probably the genius of Dickens, that he can throw that just that little sentence kind of gives you a sense of like wow, he's trying to cover up like this pain, but but that he can't completely cover it up. I mean,
Right. It's like he doesn't know what to do with it. He has
yeah.
this thought, oh, I just wish I would have done this. That's all. It's kind of minimize it, but at the same time, he's confessing it in a way to the ghost of Christmas past.
Mm-hmm. One other note on the appearance of the ghost I was thinking was I even though his face kind of has these weird this description, you can't really even quite imagine his face, but yet he's also seen almost like a candle. He's even got he carries around like the what do you call those things, the little stoppers
to snuffer,
to put out the candle. He carries it around with him, and he makes a point of it. He keeps pointing it out. Dickens does, and it's just it's interesting. He has a line in there. I always like this line. He says, "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give?" That's what I want to see Dickens. That's what Scrooge is keeps trying to do, huh? I mean, maybe in this like, oh, I was just thinking about such and such. That's all. It's and leave me alone, haunt me no longer. I was like, he keeps trying to run away from this past, which is kind of what he's been doing probably for the last 50 years, right? Is just forget all these things, right, and put them out, but then leaves them empty. Now he's cantankerous and bitter and cold, right? But
right. Well, yeah, the ghost shines the light on his past.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so there's something. I mean, that's probably kind of the magic of the story is like the ghost. That's what all these ghosts are doing, but it seems like he wants to draw attention in a unique way to this ghost. Like all of them are they're shedding light on past, present, future, but this ghost is doing it in a way that actually he looks like light. He looks like a flame. I don't know, just I like that part of him. That part I can imagine. I can, it's all the other stuff that I'm like, I don't even know how to picture him. Like, I don't even want to think about his face because it's
no. Yeah.
Maybe real quick. Anything else you want to say about that, or about just the appearance?
No.
So we before we started recording, we were talking about how there's one thing that I think is just kind of worth pointing out. It just kind of caught my attention. I think it does play into something else we're going to talk about later on our list, and that is when young Scrooge is in the schoolhouse and he's staying there for the winter, and everybody's left and he's all alone, and Scrooge is going through and he's seeing him, and he's like, oh yeah, this is the I remember this place, I remember all the streets and everything. And he says, oh look, there's Alibaba, there's Robinson Crusoe and his Man Friday, and there's and he starts pointing out all these characters in books, and that's what young Scrooge was doing at the time they saw him, was he was reading this book. But Scrooge is remembering his imagination was so strong as a boy that that was the world he created, and then he even however many 60 years later, whatever, he still remembers it in detail, like as if he's seeing it again. These are my friends. These, I just thought it was interesting little detail that I think does kind of play into something else I want to bring up. I want to point out now, but before we get on to another part of the list. But any thoughts on that, or is that just?
Yeah, well, I totally related to Scrooge with that, because there are some characters in books that I've read that seem so real. And and I'm just now thinking of this, but maybe, when I look back on my memories, people that I knew when I was younger, what's the difference between my memory of them and my memory of the characters that I read about when I was younger?
That's a really good question. I mean, that's good. That's a very interesting idea.
I mean, I think
Huh.
a person reading a book who really gets into a book,
Hmm.
it makes me wonder how authentic is that experience compared to, I mean, there's nothing to replace the experience of life, you know, and being out in the world, but it just, I guess, can show you maybe how powerful fiction can be to have as strong of memories as we can have of characters.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah, I agree. I was wondering, like, I hear people talk about, like, you know, like kids had a vivid imagination, and I was like, did I have a vivid enough imagination? Like, I should have pictured these people a little more clearly. Like, but I think you're right. That go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think people, you can run into this very clearly when you watch a movie for the first time and you read the book first. And
Right.
the movie is so different than what you imagined it to be when you read the book.
Right.
And so, you know, "Oh, that's not the person that I saw in my head, or that's not
Right.
who I know this
It's not
person
my
to be."
Gandalf.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that fiction is very powerful. And one of the benefits of reading is, and I think we talked about this maybe in um, our first conversation about Dickens, is just how you get to experience all of these different things just from the comfort and safety of your chair or your
Hmm.
couch or wherever you read, you know, and so you can have these broad experiences more than you could ever have had, you know, by trying to go out and live them.
Yeah.
Of course, the lived experiences are much more vibrant, but maybe for Scrooge they weren't. He was a lonely boy. He seemed kind of, you know, he was very sad, and maybe the books were his refuge and his friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, after that, we skip ahead towards Fezziwig's, you know, which is this joyful scene of dancing and merriment, and then after that, we cut to, you know, um, the um, the conversation he has with Belle. Belle, right?
I
That's
think so.
her
Yeah.
name.
Uh-huh.
So she is basically saying, like, you know, I'm releasing you from, you know, I guess their engagement, huh? And then we see, and this is the, I mean, there's a lot of adaptations out there, both movies, TV shows. People do kind of parodies of you know, the Christmas Carol, and I've never seen it's the last scene. I've never seen. Maybe I'm just missing it or don't remember. I don't remember. You see, you know, maybe my memory's not. But you know, there's that scene where he sees her with her family, with her husband and children, and that's the point where he was like, just can't handle it anymore, and he has to snuffs out the ghost, you know, and but that whole scene was just like, you know, you get to that point, you're like, that doesn't show up in the movies. Like, where is this all about? Like, at some point I was like thinking it was some other scene. I was like, wait, something, this isn't, I don't think this is, and I've read it before, but like I don't remember it even. You know, like,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
next time I read it, you know, next Christmas or whatever, I'm gonna be like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I wonder if it's almost too cruel to make into the movie adaptations. You know, I mean, it's a very, it's got to be really hard for him. I mean, like you say, it is that final straw where he snuffs out the light. He doesn't want to see it because it's almost like it's getting into what could have been. It- Um,
Yeah,
and that's just really painful, I would think, for him to
right.
see that.
Yeah. Which, you know, there's a certain lesson in there, in as much as the ghost means him well, and he says this later on to, I think, the third ghost. It's something like, you know, I know you all you mean me well, just as the other ghost did. Like, their intention is his good, but sometimes that hurts. You know, sometimes, like, healing means the healing is going to hurt more than the wound itself sometimes, right? And so the ghost is actually trying to help him, but it just means, like, this part of the healing, like, he was so happy to see all these other memories. Well, maybe not the child memory, but you know, the Fezziwigs, and I mean, that was kind of the happiest memory of them all, you know.
Right.
And yet, you know, now he's like suffering, you know, from this, but he means him well. He's doing him good, you know. He just doesn't see it that way at the time, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
In this scene, though, you had pointed out to me anyway that there's a shift that happens in the way the story is being told, just temporarily. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I'm going to try to find it because it's so it was so striking to me that, the narrator has kind of interjected. They call that an intrusive narrator. And in a lot of literature of that time period, you'll see the author will like refer to himself or herself in some way. But in this section, it's almost like the narrator is a character because he goes on for so long talking about himself. And this is when Scrooge is looking at Belle and her family, and he sees her surrounded by all the people that are there. And the narrator, this is the narrator. I had to look a couple of times, and I actually went online to look at it online to see if I had a typo in my printout. But it's the narrator who says, "What would I not have given to be one of them?" And he means one of the people that are gathered there. "Though I never could have been so rude. No, no. I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world have crushed that braided hair and torn it down." And then later he says, "And yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her." So who is this I mean, he's talking about Belle, I think, or maybe Belle's daughter. And who is this person that seems to be so enamored of her, but it's not Scrooge?
Yeah, it was a mystery. I actually put like a question mark there because I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But it's a bizarre little kind of turn all of a sudden, where it's like, because it is a little jarring, that like, I wonder if, now this is where this is pure speculation on my part, but I wonder if there's a connection with what we talked about a moment ago, about how, like, Scrooge, when he was reading these books, they became alive to him, right? These became so real to him that even decades later, he remembers vividly what his imagination created. And so in some ways, like, Dickens, the narrator, we'll just say the narrator, enters into this story that he's telling so much that it's like, this isn't just a story I'm telling you. This is like my story. This is like, I'm entering into it. This is my imagination has created this, and I want to be there. I don't know. I just speculating. I wonder if there's
Yeah.
like, he's
I don't
so
know.
caught up in the story itself that he becomes, like, unintentionally or intentionally unintentionally, a character in it, but not like in it, but just more a specter. It's like he's gone into the page, and like now he's like seeing this as more as just like, he's not just telling us a story anymore. Now he's kind of like, I want to be in this story. Like, this is,
Yeah,
anyway.
and maybe the character of Belle is so important to him, or he wants us to understand just what a loss this is for Scrooge. Or maybe she's based on someone that he feels strongly about or felt strongly about. Maybe this is part of his own memories that he's drawing upon. I don't know. Maybe it's an inside joke or something, or inside reference maybe.
Well, I do wonder, like, sometimes there's like a lot of references in here that, like, I can't understand what he's talking about, but I'm sure like 150 years ago they would have, like, people would have been laughing out loud, like, oh, I can't believe he said that way, like, but the reference is lost on us now. I don't know. But I wonder if, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I wonder if there's a sense of, like, if he had put it in Scrooge's mind, like if he had just said Scrooge saw this and he wanted to, reach out, how much he wanted to be a part of this, it would have just been Scrooge's interest. It would have just been like, well, this is something he loved and lost, and now he's wishing, he is wishful thinking or whatever, but by putting it in the narrator's voice, he's saying this isn't just something that Scrooge missed out on. This is something that is beautiful in itself, right? Like, this life that they're living is a beautiful thing, regardless of whether Scrooge has any affection or had affection for Belle at one point. Like, this is just a beautiful thing that he's seeing. So it goes beyond just his own subjective interest. It's like, here's something that's good and wonderful, and I don't know.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, I wonder if he meant it to just kind of be like, I don't want you to just think about how Scrooge sees this. I want you to see it this way. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to that.
Lastly, you had asked a question about that, just something for our group that is doing this with us. So a question for us to think about. That's good to raise now, but to think about as we keep reading through. You want to say something on that?
Yeah, I was noticing in myself, I was watching the progression of Scrooge's character, and it's clear that the ghost is taking him to these places. He says for his not rehabilitation, but it's something like that. It's for his own
Yeah.
good. Do you remember that word, or that there was a word that he used?
Yeah, start with an R.
Yeah. And so he's doing this for Scrooge's sake. And so I'm watching Scrooge, thinking to myself, oh, it's nice to see, these things have an effect on Scrooge. But then I realized it's also having an effect on me. It's having an effect on my attitude towards Scrooge. Seeing his childhood and seeing what he lived through is making him more sympathetic to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the same time that this is working on Scrooge to soften him up, in a way, it's also softening up my heart towards Scrooge, because he's an easy guy to hate.
Mm-hmm.
He is the perfect, curmudgeon, but when you see his childhood and the struggles he went through, I did end up beginning to feel more sympathetic towards him.
Yeah. I remember hearing someone say something like be kind to everyone you meet, because everyone you meet is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. That it's easy for us to look at Scrooge not knowing anything about him at the beginning of the book. I mean, obviously we do know about him, but like to read through it and be like, just imagine him, just like if you pass him on the street, like even the description of nobody passing him on the street would ever wish him a good day or whatever. They just walk him to the side because that was who he is, and that's how he preferred it. And it's like just emptiness, coldness, just bitterness in his heart, and it's easy. Yeah, you're right. It's easy to extremely dislike the guy, right, and not want anything to do with him. But then you think someone like that in real life has some backstory. Like there's a reason why they're like that, and it should create a certain sympathy. So now we're starting to I think you're right. We're starting to feel a little more sympathy for him as we see the things he's been through and what he's had to, even when he, was let go or released from his engagement to Belle, right? Like his desire for, wealth. Well, that was ultimately what led it to it, but it was because of a fear of poverty. It's like, there's nothing I can think of more that terrifying. What does he say? There's nothing on which it is so hard as poverty. There's nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth. Meaning the world. There's nothing the world is so hard as poverty. That poverty is for him like that the greatest evil to be feared, and so it led him to this almost basically turning wealth into an idol. But at least you can see it's because he spent every winter by himself alone, and in poverty, and to the point where he had to wait for his dad to sober up so he can come home, right? I mean, these are the things that he had to deal with as a child, and so it makes sense that would fester in him, that fear of poverty. So you can start to sympathize with him even in his curmudgeonry,
Right, yeah. I think it humanizes him. It takes him out of the realm of being just the bad guy in the novel,
right,
to being a real person, in a way. It rounds his character a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and we'll see it more, of course, and as we go through. But yeah, it's a different Scrooge even at the end of chapter 1 than when we saw at the end of chapter 2. Or I mean, no, I meant that the other way around. He's different at the end of chapter 1 chapter 2 as he was at the end of chapter 1. And so, I think, I mean, they're really the character. So what's interesting, so there's a style of literature called Bildungsroman, which is a German word. I don't remember exactly what it means. Something to the effect of basically it means the plot isn't so much the events that happen, but they're the it's the moral development of the character that is the real plot, right? So oftentimes there's not like big events that happen. It's more just like the change in the person, which is really, in some ways, this is a Bildungsroman, but it's also like there's some really interesting things happening outside of the person too. You know, like it's kind of a best of both worlds kind of thing. But he
Yeah,
really is kind of a story of conversion. You know?
Yeah, I always saw those stories as kind of a coming of age.
Yeah.
Even if it's someone who's old. I mean, we just watched in my family over the Thanksgiving holiday, we just watched the Hobbit films, and Bilbo goes through that same or a similar transformation. He's not a curmudgeon, but he does grow up through the course of the story, even though he's middle-aged at the beginning of the story. And here we have an old man, Scrooge, kind of, at the end of his career, who is kind of coming of age, so to speak.
Yeah. And Dickens really kind of like is a master at that style anyway. Like a lot of his books are exactly that. David Copperfield, Great Expectations. He writes. He seems to be much more interested in the character and how they change and how they develop than he is in necessarily like these fantastic adventures that they go on.
Right.
But in this case, it's got both. He does go on this fantastic adventure. Literally a fantastic. It's a fantasy.
Yes.
But, yeah. Any other thoughts on Stave 2 that come to mind? Or?
No. I think it's the story's really getting going, and he does keep it moving. It's a very compact and efficient story, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. That's what I was saying earlier, is just how much he crams into just a few pages, and he can do a character development. He can have the events. He's just a very brilliant writer, in terms of like the art of like. There's a science to writing. There's a way to like get the reader's imagination to turn on a dime to the next thing. That he's able to do that in this story so well. I think so we're in one scene, then immediately we're in the next scene, and we're already there. We're like invested, even though it's like, well, but what about the scene before? We're
and that's
still
kind
there
of
too.
different. I mean, when I think of Dickens, when a lot of people think of Dickens, I think they think of these long stories. When you look at the opening sentence of A Tale of Two Cities, that's a whole paragraph that's just one sentence. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was this, it was that. And so Dickens certainly can write with a lot of words. But with this book, with this story, he's very modern. I think more modern than this is not that different than a book that was written in maybe the 30s or 40s. Today's books move a little bit more quickly, but compared to some of his other novels, Bleak House, he's got whole sections of the fog crawling through, and this image of the fog, but this is very, very concise and
yeah,
and
very
it's
enjoyable.
It's a song. It's a Christmas carol.
There you go. Right. That's right. Well, should we call it a wrap there, and we'll pick it up next week with Stave 3?
Sounds great.
Right. Well, thank you, Deacon. Yeah. We'll talk again.
All right.
Bye-bye.